For our first keynote speaker, I'm really pleased that we've got Professor Kees Hoogland with us. He's the Professor of Mathematical and Analytical Competencies of Professionals, which was not easy for me to say there, at the University of Applied Sciences in Utrecht. Kees, we're really pleased to have you with us this morning. I know you're going to give us some thoughts to start with, and then we're going to also open it up to some question and answers from the audience. So, Kees, welcome, and over to you.
Great to be here. I consider it a big honor to be invited to share some ideas and some experience we have in the Netherlands and in a lot of partner countries with our work on numeracy. We basically work on numeracy, and we really like to share some ideas and some developments with this audience. It was very interesting, of course, to see the theme of your annual conference, Maximizing Multiply. That's immediately a very interesting numeracy statement, I think. And it made me think about how that exactly works, but that's very interesting. What I really like to do is, let's see if this, yes, talk a bit for 20 minutes. So it will be a bit fast, but I will share this presentation with all the participants. So you have the PowerPoint, and you can maybe have a look at some details. I will now, sometimes are very fast moving. So the recent developments we like to share are from different Erasmus Plus projects. We worked from 2018 on what we call the Common European Numeracy Framework, and we brought together all kinds of ideas from all kinds of countries, even the United Kingdom, of course, with the developments on the numeracy strategy, etc., in a kind of a common language on what are important aspects when you think about numeracy, teaching numeracy, and provisions in numeracy. And we were very lucky to have a follow-up project from 22 to 24, Numeracy in Practice. And in that project, with 11 countries, 11 European countries, we tried to develop those ideas further in materials, in awareness materials, in professional development modules, etc., etc. Further are we a bit attached to the second cycle of PIAC. I will tell you a bit more about that later. And we have some small projects, for instance, Maths in Prison, and there are very interesting developments going on for all kinds of special interest groups. I think the challenges we always present are the same challenges I see in your country, of course, and I think there are two major parts of that. I think especially around numeracy, it is not only the problems that citizens have with numeracy, but there is also a problem with the awareness of the importance of numeracy for personal empowerment and for societal and economic development. I think it is still, there are a lot of paradigms around numeracy that sometimes are not very helpful for further development, and I will show you a bit about that too. And the interesting part, for instance, in the Netherlands, when you see the graph at the right side, you cannot read the Dutch text probably, but in the Netherlands we have more people with low numeracy than we have people with low literacy. But nevertheless, 99% of the budget goes to literacy and only 1% goes to numeracy. And that's one of those aspects you see in more countries, that the awareness of the importance of numeracy is a bit lagging behind. And at the same time, we witness what we call a mathematization of society. More and more and more numbers, diagrams, graphs are used for communication between people, but also between government and people, between commerce and people, between hospital and health, industry and people. More and more numbers are used. So, and it has, of course, to do with digitalization, technology, and the availability to make graphs, etc., etc. So we really are working towards a mathematization of society. For instance, this is the Corona dashboard of the Netherlands. And even if you don't understand the language, you still can see that probably 80% of the information here is numeracy information. There are numbers, absolute numbers, relative numbers. Even the map is not a map of the Netherlands, but is a graph with densities. And that's the way the government nowadays communicates with their citizens. And they assume that everyone understands it and that they make sensible decisions based on this information. And that's a very interesting assumption. But it's not only the situation that are mathematized, but people more and more are confronted with all kinds of situations around money, shopping, reading the newspaper, etc. What's going on in Europe and in the United Kingdom, of course, the last PIAG results meant that these are the percentage of the working population that scored on a 5-point scale, level 1 and below. So for 5-point scale, level 1 and below, these are the percentages. And level 1 and below are associated with having difficulties with numeracy situations. For literacy, it's the same. If you have level 1 or below, people are assumed to have regular problems with those situations. So that's from maybe a quarter of the people to 1/7 of the people have regular problems with all kinds of numeracy situations. And that's of course one of the reasons why some countries like the United Kingdom, I think, invest in numeracy provisions and awareness of that. But there is still a lot to do, I think, and I think sometimes the importance of this is underestimated, because I think also in fake news and that kind of things, if you look at now going on the elections in the United States and the use of numbers and the use of fake news, I think a good level of numeracy could be helpful for that too. But if you want to do something about numeracy, and it must be a kind of an effective way to really empower people to become more, to improve their numerate behavior, I think one of the most promising approaches is seeing numeracy as a social practice. And that means that you don't look only at the skill, at the technical skill of doing calculations, but that you, in your teaching, combine all kinds of elements, how people experience numeracy, how they use it in daily life, where they see it all around them. And if you are trained to do that, maybe in one day you come across maybe 50 to 100 numeracy situations, maybe even unconscious. When you start the day, most people, when they start the day, they make the first numeracy decision. They look at the clock, or they look at their smartphone, what the time is, and if they have to get up or not yet. So all those kinds of things are numeracy decisions. And if you look at a day or a week, you make hundreds of numeracy decisions. What we use as a leading concept in the Common European Numeracy Framework is this diagram with 4 quadrants. And what we say is, yes, of course, if you want to become better in numeracy, if you want to improve your numerate behavior, you have to do something with knowledge and skills. Quantity and number, doing calculations, of course, but also getting better in using all kinds of tools for that. But as important are the context in which you do that numerate activities. In everyday life, in work-related things, in further learning, but also on the teams, finance, health is a very important part where you use a lot of numeracy. And it is not only about the knowledge and skills and context, but more and more higher order skills are necessary to cope with those numeracy situations. And with what do we mean by higher order skills? It is more about interpreting the situation, managing the situations, reasoning with the numbers, problem solving sometimes, but also critical thinking. Can this be true? What is the meaning of this number? What is the the intention of the people who are presenting these numbers. And more we see that those higher order skills are key if you want to improve the numerate behavior. And so the higher order skills should be more and more part of our education, I think, and of our numeracy provisions. But we have one more quadrant that is very important. So the dispositions or attitude or whatever you call them, or the affective parts of learning. Without self-confidence and without belief that you can do it, and without some flexibility and some ideas about collaboration with the others, that can be very helpful, and it can also be very not helpful if you have a very low self-belief, etc., etc. One of the things that I want to highlight from this is that the math anxiety is, I think, still one of the most spread. How should I call it? It is really a barrier for a lot of people to make progress to improve their numerate behavior. And math anxiety, it's very important to realize math anxiety is not a learner's characteristic, but math anxiety is a product of education. So education has caused math anxiety. And so education can also, I think, help to address this with adults, and by talking with them and do some autobiographic or biographic talks about how they experienced primary school, etc. So, because math anxiety can be really a showstopper if you want to improve numerate behavior. So what we try to do is, in all the activities we develop, we always acknowledge that we have a mix of this kind of aspects, and that we have to address all kinds of these aspects in all our educational activities. This is the same with in words. And we try to differentiate it a bit between levels. We say we have a level of personal use, how people use numeracy at home, the citizens use with the media and with reading the newspaper, etc., etc. And we have a kind of professional use, of course. Some people use it in daily life and use it a lot. So we try to distinguish a bit between those kind of learners and between the material they need. There is one other thing that I really like to share with you, because it is a discussion that is always going on. And I'm sure you have the same discussions in the United Kingdom with teachers, with policymakers, with learners, with media, social media. What are now exactly those relevant basic numeracy skills if we look at 2022 or 2030, and how can we teach them? But the relevant is the key word here, and I will address this a few minutes. So probably you recognize the kind of discussion. What we hear a lot is when I talk about this kind of things, and I give a lot of presentations about this kind of things in all kinds of countries, and there's always one question coming up quite quickly, and it goes like this a bit. Now, absolutely fine, those broad, holistic ideas and connecting with reality, very appropriate for our learners who use it in a functional and practical way, but then always comes the but. First, of course, we need to explain, reteach, repair, practice, remedy those basic calculation skills which they don't have, which they don't have learned, which they didn't maintain enough, which they don't teach anymore in primary school. There are quite some countries who still think that you can solve all those numeracy challenges in primary school by simply teaching them the multiplication tables, and then you are fine for the rest of your life. But of course, that is nonsense, because as we saw, the world is changing, society is changing quite rapidly, more and more examples of how you use numbers to communicate are coming to us every day. So we believe much more in lifelong learning, and that numeracy should be part of lifelong learning, like literacy and like digital skills, as the three cornerstones of lifelong learning. and that you always can empower people. At every age, you can empower people to improve their numerate behavior. It is not a technical skill you learn when you are 10 and then you are finished for the rest of your life. So we really believe in an ongoing endeavor to improve numeracy skills. But this is interesting because it always comes up in discussions. You probably recognize it. And so we developed something that we called catastrophic teaching of basic skills. And that is the situation when people learn a basic skill, they practice it, and then they never use it again. Because that is very demotivational. It gives even a feeling of alienation and a loss of meaning, because you are in an educational situations and a teacher is teaching you something, so you're doing something and you practice it, you think, oh, I master it now, and then you never use it. And that is basic activities that are taught in schools, but also in adult educations sometimes. And most of the time that has to do with doing calculations with pen and paper in all kinds of situations and fractions, etc., etc. So what we really like, and there's more a positive way to look at it, is teaching skills to use. So and that's the way you learn it, you practice it, and you use it functionally in all kinds of situations in daily life. And then you get that kind of empowerment as you think, hey, I can use it here, and you can improve it, and you see it in other situations, etc., etc. So that is really important, that there is a connection between the skills you learn and the functionality where you use it. And we always start with the functionality by letting talk about these kinds of things, but also let them make pictures of it, photos of it in their daily life where they encounter this kind of numeracy situations, and they take it as a starting point for education. And why is this discussion still going on? And it makes it is understandable why this discussion is still going on. Because before 1975, there was a big focus on the basic facts in formal notations, tables of multiplication and the small additions and subtractions. And it made a lot of sense, because you needed those basic facts in that time. You needed almost every day. There were standardized procedures to calculate, and calculations with pen and paper. And of course you needed them, because if you wanted to make the bigger multiplications and the bigger additions and the bigger divisions, you had to use those basic facts. Otherwise, you cannot do the procedures with pen and paper for the multiplication, etc., etc. That basically meant that everyone in the shops, housewives, at school, in commerce, in health, people did with pen and papers all did. So it was a kind of a consistent whole of basic facts you learned, and you use them almost on a daily basis. But the interesting thing is, at that time was a very functional use. But, and you saw it, of course, in this kind of things that you immediately see that they are already a bit old. That changed, I think, almost 50 years ago. We have calculators, we have computers, we have models, we have apps, we have the mathematization of society. So the world has seriously changed. We have calculators in pens, in all kinds of all kinds of calculators are everywhere. And even if you type in Google everything you want to know, 6 times 8, or much in complicated things, even if you want to multiply fractions, it is quite amazing. If you type in Google 1 space 3/4 space x, not multiplication, but x, space 7 space, then Google knows you probably want to multiply fractions. So from there, fitting it in to what Google thinks you mean? There is an algorithm. I think they spent many hours to write this algorithm to recognize that probably someone wants to multiply fractions. Quite amazing if you really think about it. But if you have Siri on your mobile phone and you say 6 times 9, he just gives you the right answer. So that's going on nowadays. And that means that if you want to do something with those basic facts, we have to do it in a more practical way. For instance, in games and digital games that are going on, there's a very effective way to have people use a lot of those basic facts. You can visualize all kinds of basic facts, and people use that in daily life to make a quick estimation or to count in an efficient way. Very interesting is also to do more auditory things. Talk with people about 6 times 8 and not only do it on pen and paper, on paper. And in estimations, we see a lot of things still going on, because estimating is basically, for complex situations, bringing it back to a simple addition or a simple multiplication. But then it is very helpful if you know that multiplication, what is the answer. And you can do that, do a lot of those estimations. So are these basic facts still widely used? Yes, probably, but not to do those large calculations, and more about doing estimating, global arithmetic, order of magnitude, proportional reasoning, digital games, and functional use. So we really, in our education, must develop. I think those large calculations, if you go to the internet, you can find thousands and thousands of exercises with pen and paper, and big multiplications and additions, etc., etc. It's very under researched, I think, and underdeveloped to have really good ways to teach people those nowadays things where they use those basic facts. And that's the challenge I think we have for the next 10 or 20 years. Okay, so if we combine that a bit with the tool used, it's very interesting to realize that tools are permitted. Of course, adults use tools. So dealing wisely and critically with a calculator is a skill. You have to practice that. Some people don't really understand what a calculator does, how it is with the order of things, etc., etc. But it's a kind of magical thing, and I think it is good that people really own also the functionality of the calculator. So you have to practice that to improve the numeric behavior. But you can also use Google or any other search engine to do all kinds of numeracy calculations. We try to translate that to all kinds of educational activities, of course, for adults. And because of the shift in those 4 holistic approaches, it means that we don't have much what we call a book with calculations or something, or an arithmetic book or a numeracy book, but it is all about having conversations, talk about the math anxiety, explore the world around you, work on the awareness where you use all these numeric things, and discuss themes and numbers in media a lot. And it's very interesting with adults because they really can reflect how it is when they read numbers in the newspaper, how it is about inflation and about gasoline prices, but also in health, how it is to have medications, but also risks on health risks, etc., etc. And so what we did, we made some thematic, what we call placemats, with all kinds of pictures, just to get the discussion going on all kinds of themes when we work with groups of adults. We give thematic courses where the numeracy is a bit more hidden. There's courses on educational games, on budgeting, or on cooking. And of course, all those things are very rich of numeracy situations, especially if you focus on that with the learners. You can also discuss the weekly experiences they have with forms, with text forms, with all kinds of forms they need for their daily life. Also very interesting is to systematically in the language lessons also integrate a numeracy and a digital skills part. So we strongly believe that numeracy is not something besides literacy and besides digital skills, but for an adult, they don't have a literacy problem or a numeracy problem or a digital skill problem. They have a problem, and they seek a perspective, and they seek to solve the problem. And the combination of those things are very important if you have provisions for empowerment of adults to cope with the current society, which, in my idea, is highly mathematized. I think this was the overview I could give you in 20 minutes. If you have more interest in all kinds of details or examples, etc., we can discuss that by email or in other ways. But numeracy means to us that it is always connected to the real world. It means it must empower the individual. It is not for selection. It is not to give them math anxiety. It should empower the individual. If you are learning and practicing math facts, very basic skills, preferably informal in digital games, visual, etc., use those calculations facts for estimation and learn to master various tools for calculation and use them critically. This is, I think, in a nutshell, the things we are working on, the ideas we have, and I think by timing, I leave it at this, Stephen.
Brilliant. Thank you, Kees. There's so much that we could go through there. You covered a lot of ground in that 20 minutes. Well, that feels like an excellent note to finish on. Kees, we're really grateful for your time this morning. That was a super interesting presentation and lots of other questions and comments that we didn't quite have time to get to. So you definitely provoked a lot of thinking. So thank you so much for your time this morning.